Okay, hello everybody. Can everybody hear me? All right, that's good. So, we'll just get going from where we were last time. We ended chapter 1. Does anybody have any questions about the transition from becoming to existence? I know I went over that as much as I could, but if there are still questions, we could still go over that. Otherwise, we'll just get right on to chapter 2. All right, seems not. All right, so chapter 2, existence. Existence is determinate being. Its determinateness is existent determinateness, quality. Through its quality, something is opposed to an other. It is alterable and finite, negatively determined not only towards an other, but absolutely within it. This negation in it, in contrast at first with the finite something, is the infinite. The abstract opposition in which these determinations appear resolves itself into oppositionless infinity, into being for itself. The treatment of existence is therefore in 3 divisions. A. Existence as such. B. Something and other, finitude. C. Qualitative infinity. So that's just an overview of the chapter. A. Existence as such. In existence, A as such, its determinant is first, B, to be distinguished as quality. That latter, however, is to be taken in both the determinations of existence as reality and negation. In these determinacies, however, existence is something reflected into itself, and as so reflected, it is posited as C, something, and existent. A. Existence in general. Existence proceeds from becoming. It is the simple oneness of being and nothing. On account of this simplicity, it has the form of an immediate. Its mediation, the becoming, lies behind it. It has sublated itself, and existence therefore appears as a first from which the forward move is made. It is at first in the one-sided determination of being. The other determination which it contains, nothing, will likewise come up in it, in contrast to the first. So, bit on that. So existence is just this. It's just the unity of being and nothing. Whenever we say that anything exists, the meaning of that is quite literally that it is by not being, or is a being in virtue of non-being, or non-being in virtue of being. It works either way. Existence here also ends up functionally doing that. Anytime you have a being, every time we say anything is, we know that there must be a nothing, which it is not, beside it as well. It is not mere being, but existence, or Dasein in German. According to its German etymology, it is being, sein, in a certain place, da. But the representation of space does not belong here. As it falls upon becoming, existence is in general being with a non-being, so that this non-being is taken up into simple unity with being. Non-being thus taken up into being, with the result that the concrete whole is in the form of being, of immediacy, constitutes determinateness as such. So if existence is just the simple unity of being and nothing, determinateness is the being of the unity of being and nothing. That is the distinction between existence and determinacy. This existence only makes explicit the unity, but doesn't specify what that unity is, whereas determinacy specifies that unity in the form of being. The whole is likewise in the form or determinateness of being, since in becoming, being has likewise shown itself to be only a moment, something sublated, negatively determined. It is such, however, for us in our reflection, not yet as posited in it. What is posited, however, is the determinateness as such of existence, as is also expressed by the da, or there, of the Dasein. The two are always to be clearly distinguished. Only that which is posited in a concept belongs in the course of the elaboration of the latter to its content. Any determinateness not yet posited in the concept itself belongs instead to our reflection, whether this reflection is directed to the nature of the concept itself or is a matter of external comparison. To remark on a determinateness of this last kind can only be for the clarification or anticipation of the whole that will transpire in the course of the development itself. That the whole, the unity of being and nothing, is in the one-sided determinateness of being is an external reflection. But in negation, in something and other, and so forth, it will become posited. It was necessary here to call attention to the distinction just given, but to comment on all that reflection can allow itself, to give an account of it, would lead to a long-winded anticipation of what must transpire in the fact itself. Although such reflections may serve to facilitate a general overview and thus facilitate understanding, they also bring the disadvantage of being seen as unjustified assertions, unjustified grounds and foundations of what is to follow. They should be taken for no more than what they are supposed to be, and should be distinguished from what constitutes a moment in the advance of the fact itself. So if you're wondering what Hegel means by external or immanent reflections, here at least he tells us what external reflections are. External reflections are anything that hasn't come up explicitly in a concept already. So, with being and nothing, if we talk about becoming, before we develop becoming, and we say, oh, well, being and nothing are moments of becoming, that's initially an external reflection. It's no longer an external reflection once we actually work it out and develop the concept of becoming. Likewise, it would be like people who want to talk about stuff like this and talk about it from the standpoint of the concept or the universal particular individual. Those would be from this standpoint of the development external reflections, even if they are true. They are nonetheless external and not yet justified within the logical development itself. Here, posited, I think we discussed this last time, to be posited means literally that it's put forth within the concept itself. So, being and nothing are posited by being, and themselves also posit becoming. Being and nothing are posited by becoming, and then they themselves also end up positing becoming in a certain way. Insofar as we show that this does happen in development. If we don't, it's sort of our own external reflection. This bit that the whole, the unity of being and nothing is in the one-sided determinateness of being is an external reflection. So here we only have the unity. We haven't specified what that unity is, whether it's the unity of being or nothing. To say that it's specifically the unity of being or nothing would be to have determinateness of this determinateness before we have even determined it. So it's an external reflection to say that it is the determinateness of being specifically. There's also, yet again, one of his little commentaries about external reflections would be people would say, well, what about this and what about that? What about what Deleuze says? What about what Heidegger says here or there? What about Heidegger's own conception of Dasein, for example? And Hegel says those are external reflections. They don't matter to the development of this argument. It's sort of pointless to try to anticipate all the possible rebuttals that people might make or objections that they might make, because there's literally an infinity of them. So he's not going to bother too much with dealing with possible objections or rebuttals beyond what is already immanent to the concept itself. There's also little to be done about trying to get you to understand this at a more concrete level when we aren't at a more concrete level. Although he will do this, and he has done this already. All right, continuing. Existence corresponds to being in the preceding sphere, but being is the indeterminate. There are no determinations that therefore transpire in it, but existence is determinate being, something concrete. Consequently, several determinations, several distinct relations of its moments immediately emerge in it. All right. Excuse me. B, quality. On account of the immediacy with which being and nothing are one in existence, neither oversteps the other. To the extent that existence is existent, to that extent it is non-being, it is determined. Being is not the universal, determinateness not the particular. Determinateness has yet to detach itself from being, nor will it ever detach itself from it, since the now underlying truth is the unity of non-being with being. All further determinations will transpire on this basis. But the connection which determinateness now has with being is one of the immediate unity of the two, so that as yet no differentiation between the two is posited. All right, so reading that more slowly. On account of the immediacy with which being and nothing are one in existence, neither oversteps the other. So, we have a being on its side, nothing on its side. Insofar as being is, it is not nothing. Insofar as nothing is nothing. If this is existence and it exists, we have this relationship of a doubling of existence, as you can see. So we have existence which is existent. Does that make sense? And whenever you see that repetition, that self-relationship or self-reference or self-reflection of the concept of existence, it's because existence plays itself out upon itself. So, it's like the concept is within itself, operates itself. Is that clear to everybody? Yes, no, somebody? All right. Now he says being is not the universal, determinist, not the particular. That whole little spiel is at this point, we don't have distinct entities. At this point, being is not an entity, determinist isn't a property of an entity. For example, being is not substance, determinacy is not a property of a substance. Existence is being, determinist is being, being is determinateness, being is existence. Determinateness, thus isolated by itself as existent determinateness, is quality, something totally simple, immediate. Determinateness in general is the more universal, which, further determined, can be something quantitative as well. On account of this simplicity, there is nothing further to say about quality as such. All right. So again, if that which is circled here is the red, is determinateness, being with a non-being within it. The higher unity here is quality. Determinateness and quality as such mean the exact same thing. As Hegel noted, it's just determinacy will remain more general of a term than quality itself is. Because determinateness can also be a quantity, not just quality. So existence, however, in which nothing existence, however, in which nothing and being are equally contained, is itself the measure of the one-sidedness of quality as an only immediate or existent determinateness. Quality is equally to be posited in the determination of nothing, and the result is that the immediate or existent determinateness is posited as distinct, reflected, and the nothing, as thus the determinate element of determinateness, will equally be something reflected, a negation. Decos mentions coming back to this after having spent a little time with Aristotle and Plato seems to have helped a lot. Maybe. It's been a long time since I've read Aristotle and Plato, and I haven't read that much of them. All right, so let me try to visualize this. So in a way, this is determinateness, or you could say this is quality. Insofar as quality exists, what we mean by existence in its immediacy is we are privileging the moment of being. So, quality is. Insofar as quality is, it is reality, but to be is to exist. And to exist is, of course, to be in unity with a non-being right beside. So insofar as quality exists, we don't have a one-sided quality, but we have a two-sided quality. We have reality, and we have negation. Now, there's something interesting here. And I would say that interesting thing is this little passage where he says, quality is equal to be posited in the determination of nothing, and the result is the immediate or existent determinateness is posited as distinct, reflected, and the nothing as thus the determinate element of determinateness will equally be something reflected, a negation. That distinct, reflected aspect is not a mere coincidental thing that he's talking about. This to me is what tells you what the meaning of negation is. I have never read anything that actually explains what negation as such is. I can't say that I have read a lot of secondary literature, but I've read at least half of what people consider to be the major commentaries. I have never seen anybody explain what the hell negation is. Everybody just goes, well, negation is just, that opposite to reality. Negation negates, is that which determines. But I think there has to be a certain explanation, and that bit about distinction, reflectedness, is very important. Okay, something's going weird with my program. That's fine. Hold on. There we go. So let's go back to determinacy. So determinacy is being, non-being, within being. It's kind of sloppy. So this is just pure quality or determinacy. reality, let's say, one way to understand it is reality is this unity. Reality is the unity which subsumes things back into the immediacy of being. Whereas negation, the difference of negation is that negation is the distinction, the non-being, like the mutual non-being of this unity which reality asserts. So reality asserts the unity of being and nothing as itself being, whereas negation asserts the non-being of this unity. So negation is that split, that distinction between being and nothing, or within anything, really. So it's a negation is the non-being of that unity. Does that make sense? Anybody wish to comment on that? Makes sense? Yes, no? Oh, hey, welcome, Tree. Rain, Justin, Decause, anybody? Hello, can you hear me?
I'm following you. I can hear you loud and clear. It's working for me so far.
Okay. All right, just reading a few comments here. All right, because I just want everybody to get this down, because this is something that I think is crucial for the way things work from here on out. Just like how becoming is a very crucial little piece for how things end up functioning much later down the line. So, it's important to understand that when we're talking about negations, we're going to talk about obviously this relation of non-being, and that the meaning of this cognitive operation is precisely the making of this distinction between unities, or within unities, or rather the depositing of the disunity of things. You can put it in many ways. The Spirit is typing something. Hegel says, Spirit comments, Hegel says reality is where negation is involved in it, but distinguished from it. But what is the difference between quality and reality, in your opinion? There is no difference. Reality is just quality in the mode of being, and negation is quality in the mode of nothing or non-being. Both are qualities, and as a matter of fact, Hegel will say they are both full qualities. All right, let's continue then. So we got that. Both are in existence, but in reality, as quality with the accent on being and existent, that it is determinateness, and hence also negation is concealed. Reality only has, therefore, the value of something positive, from which negating, restriction, lack are excluded. Negation, for its part, taken as mere lack, would be what nothing is, but it is an existence, a quality, only determined with a non-being. Spirit comments, that is not true, I believe. He says that quality is determinateness that is or is in the form of being. Yeah, that's exactly what reality is. Like, yeah, because reality, it's just like becoming. Becoming isn't something different to coming to be and ceasing to be. Those are just the further determinations of it. So quality is determinateness, which is or is existent, which just means it's determinateness. But in reality, when we say reality exists or is, which also implies that it exists, that's just a moment of being, a moment in which most people just go like, well, that's sort of obvious. There's nothing more to say. And Hegel says, well, no, we know that if there is something more to say, because anything that is exists, and therefore there must be a reflected side to it. There must be a nothing side right beside it to make it exist. So, reality is insofar as it is not negation. So insofar as it's in that real and negated unity with negation itself. And what he says right here, repeating again, both are in existence, but in reality is quality with the accent on being and existent, that it is determinateness, and hence also negation is concealed. This brings to mind in the fact that we tend to use in common language the equivocation of existence and being, that existence only means being, whereas here existence also means non-being. But going by the common way that we use it, the accent we put on existence is the accent of being. And that's why we would mistake reality to just be a positivity without any negation. But because of what existence is, we know that's not really possible. Logically doesn't make sense. All right, so let's continue on to the remark. Reality may seem to be an ambiguous word, since it is used in different, even opposite determinations. In philosophical usage, for instance, one speaks of mere empirical reality as of a worthless being, but when it is said of thoughts, concepts, theories, that they have no reality, this means that there is no actuality to them. If of the idea of a Platonic republic, for instance, it is said that it might well be true in itself or in its concept. Here the idea is not denied its value and is even allowed room alongside reality. However, as against the so-called mere ideas, the mere concepts, the real counts as alone true. The sense in which external existence is made the criterion of the truth of a content is for its part just as one-sided as when the idea, the essence, or even inner feeling is represented as an indifferent to external existence and is even held to be all the more estimable the more remote it is from reality. All right, Spirit continues the comment on the prior section. Just going to go over further real quick. He says that is very true about what I said about reality negation. And I think this movement is difficult because the distinction is like that of becoming, where reality is just the realization or making explicitly what is already there as quality, which makes it dialectical and connects it with movement or verb of its being, and this is the extremely nuanced distinction between quality and reality. I'm not quite sure about that, because reality is just the immediacy of quality. In the immediacy, even though immediacy technically has both sides, nothing is as immediate as being is immediate. Nonetheless, we give immediacy the favor of being for historical cultural reasons, even though logically it's an indifferent thing. So in the immediacy of quality, it is reality. In that sense, there is no need to make a distinction between quality as such and then reality and negation as such. Those are just the further internal specifications of quality, just like how the moments of becoming are the further specifications of the internal structure of becoming itself. I think that it's intelligible, the distinction you make, but it's not a necessarily useful one. So I wouldn't see why you should make it.
I find...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I find things in this section tricky because of the way he decides to use the terms. Like, one thing he does that is helpful is rather than continuing to use the term nothing, because it's determinate now, he uses non-being. But with being, he doesn't advance that term the same way he does go from nothing to non-being. It's being, and then it's supposed to be like being determinate, but he doesn't usually say being determinate. He'll just use the word being again. And I find that makes the section more difficult.
Simply because you have to literally understand that when he says that, it forces the entire logic to recur. Insofar as anything is, it must exist, and therefore, if it exists, then this happens, and if that exists, then this happens, etc., etc. So, whenever you see Hegel saying, this is, throughout this chapter, it's virtually guaranteed that the meaning of that is that it exists, and that its existence therefore requires a certain logical development. Spirit comments. He moves from pure being to being with a reference, which is what he uses plain being to mean. Yeah, determinate being, basically. So continuing the comment. In connection with the term reality, mention must be made of the former metaphysical concept of God that was once made the foundation of the so-called ontological proof of God's existence. God was defined as the sum total of all realities, and of this sum total it was said that it contained no contradiction within, that none of the realities cancelled out any other, for a reality is to be taken only as a perfection, as something affirmative that contains no negation. Consequently, as it was said, the realities are not in opposition and do not contradict one another. And not only do you see that, obviously something that is part of particularly scholastic medieval metaphysics. It also, reaches all the way up until the likes of Spinoza and Leibniz. And then magnificently returns in these so-called postmodern philosophers of difference, like Deleuze, who doesn't believe in negation and only positivity, and basically treats difference in the exact same way as we treat reality here, or at least the assumption of reality is being treated here in the comment. On this concept of reality, the assumption is that the latter still remains after all negation has been brought away. However, to do this is to remove all determinateness from reality. Reality is quality existence. It therefore contains the moment of the negative and is the determinate being that it is only through it, taken in the so-called eminent sense, or as infinite in the ordinary meaning of the word, as we are said we should. Reality is expanded into indeterminateness and loses its meaning. God's goodness is supposed to be such not in the ordinary sense, but eminently. It is not different from justice, but is rather tempered by it, an expression of mediation of Leibnizian origin, just as contrariwise justice is tempered by goodness, and so neither is goodness goodness any longer, nor justice justice. Power should be tempered by wisdom, but it is then no longer power as such, for it is subject to wisdom. Wisdom should be expanded into power, but then it vanishes as end and measure setting wisdom. The true concept of the infinite and of its absolute unity that will later emerge is not to be understood as a tempering, a mutual restricting or blending, a superficial nebulous connection that can only satisfy mindless representation. When reality, taken in the sense of a determinate quality as in the said definition of God, is made to transgress its determinateness, it ceases to be reality. It becomes abstract being. God is the pure reality in all realities, or as the sum total of all realities, is the same empty absolute, void of determination and content, in which all is one. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with those particular ontological arguments. I'm not very familiar with them. I've never looked into them very much. I'm aware of them. I think I've read like Leibniz's own version, which is a sort of one of these versions about just pure, infinite, what is it called? Properties or qualities, whatever they are. And here's the point about God's goodness is supposed to be such not in the ordinary sense, but eminently it is not different from justice, but is rather tempered by it. Just as contrariwise, justice is tempered by goodness. This is contrary to the claim that these are all positive beings that don't contradict or do not exist through negation of each other, and yet here we are saying well, God is good, but it's not just goodness as such, which is good for itself, but it's goodness which is tempered by justice, and justice tempered by goodness, or power tempered by wisdom. These are determinative negative relationships of these concepts. So it undermines that whole kind of argument. Continuing, if on the contrary reality is taken in its determinateness, then since it essentially contains the moment of the negative, the sum total of all realities becomes just as much a sum total of all negations, the sum of all contradictions, a sort of first absolute power in which everything determinate is absorbed. However, since reality only exists insofar as it still has over against it something which it has not sublated, by being thought expanded in this way into an accomplished power void of restrictions, it becomes the abstract nothing, the said reality in everything real, the being in all existence that should express the concept of God is nothing else than abstract being, the same as nothing. So the way I understand that passage, this is particularly, I think, critiquing Spinoza, and he'll say in the next paragraph. There's a sense in which the sum total of positives and the sum total of negatives just kind of cancels each other out. It's a contradiction. And there's also the sense in which absolute power, if we understand it not as a speculative totality, but rather just as a subsuming or grounding substance of sorts, like Spinoza does, this simply removes all these determinations. The determinations cancels them out. There is no determination. There's no determinacy to power. Power does not itself exist. It only is. But to be is to be nothing. And so, removing the determinacy removes all bounds. Removes meaning and, existence, basically. Continuing, the determinateness is negation posited as affirmative. No, that determinateness is negation posited as affirmative is Spinoza's proposition. Omnis determinatio est negatio. All determination is negation. A proposition of infinite importance. Only negation as such is formless abstraction. However, speculative philosophy must not be accused of taking negation or nothing as an ultimate. Negation is as little an ultimate for it as reality is for it the truth. The unity of Spinoza's substance, or that there is only one substance, is a necessary consequence of this proposition that determinateness is negation. Spinoza had of necessity to posit thought and being, or extension, the two determinations, namely, which he had before him, as one in this unity, for as determinate realities the two are negations whose infinity is their unity. According to Spinoza's definition, about which more later on, the infinity of something is its affirmation. He therefore conceived them as attributes, that is, such as do not have a particular subsistence, a being in and for itself, but only as sublated as moments, or rather, since substance is the total void of internal determinateness, they are not even moments. The attributes, like the modes, are distinctions made by an external understanding. All the substantiality of individuals cannot hold its own before that substance. The individual refers to itself by setting limits to every other, but these limits are therefore also the limits of itself. They are references to the other. The individual's existence is not in the individual. True, the individual is more than just restrictions on all sides, but this more belongs to another sphere, that of the concept, in the metaphysics of being. And give me a second, gotta fix something. All right, sorry about that. Had to help family with a little bit of a phone issue. All right, Lolo. Where was I? Yeah, somewhere in the middle. So the individual refers to itself by setting limits to every other, but these limits are therefore also the limits of itself. They are references to the other. The individual's existence is in the individual, is not in the individual. True, the individual is more than just restrictions on all sides, but this more belongs to another sphere, that is the concept in the metaphysics of being. The individual is in an absolutely determinate something, and against this something, against this finite that would be in and for itself as such, determinateness asserts itself essentially as negation, dragging it into the same negative movement of the understanding that makes everything vanish into the abstract unity of substance. So that's referring to concepts we have not developed yet. Don't worry too much about the something there. Here the main understanding, I think, in this paragraph is simply that the meaning of determinacy is that there is a sort of, that if anything exists, it is determinate, and therefore it's in relationship to another. You can't get away from that, but leaving it only as that to be is to be determinate. All determination or determinacy is negation. Leaves things relative. And this is obviously a supremely postmodern thing. It's like, everything's indifference. Everything is, in context, blah, blah, blah. It's true, but it's not absolutely true. Insofar as you try to make that absolutely true, you fall into certain contradictions, and not the good kind, not the speculative kind. There's also the issue in which Spinoza cannot explain how determinacy really even is possible in the absolute substance itself. Spinoza never explains how determinacies come about at all within substance. You can only say that they don't seem to contradict substance. That's about it. So negation stands immediately over against reality. Further on, in the sphere proper to reflected determinations, it will be opposite to the positive, which is reality reflecting upon negation, the reality in which the negative, still hiding in reality as such, shines forth. This is talking about the second book. Sorry about that. The volume on essence, in which things are reflected in the sense that they are explicitly conceptualized as emerging in a negative relationship already. To have a cause is immediately to have a relationship of cause and effect. There is no cause as such. There is no effect as such. I know that there are some stupid analytics who think so, but it's literally complete nonsense. Also, you see this kind of stuff appear in physics. I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of something called monopoles in physics. Theoretical entities in which there are certain physical analogs in which they swear they've captured something that could explain how monopoly is possible, how you could have just a positive pole of magnet, which is just positive with no negative south pole, and vice versa. It's not really a sensical thing. Insofar as it is a sensical thing, it's not really talking about polarity in the proper sense. So they're not even talking about the same kinds of ontological objects. Continuing, quality specifically is a property only when, in an external connection, it manifests itself as an immanent determination. By properties of verbs, for instance, we understand determinations which are not just proper to a something, but are such that in virtue of them the something holds its own while referring to others and will not give in to the alien influences posited in it by them. On the contrary, it imposes its own determinations on the other, though it does not keep it at a distance. On the other hand, more stable determinacies, such as figure or shape, are not called properties, not even qualities, for they are thought of as alterable, and therefore as not identical with being. So I think that's an interesting point, which is a bit of some etymological philosophy. That a property is what is proper to a thing, as opposed to an accident. There are properties and accidents, one might say, in a more classical philosophical terms. Whereas I think that in the modern day, especially with analytic philosophy, the idea of properties as being proper to a thing and therefore being not just happenstance determinations or determinacies, but the determinacies that make the thing as what it is, that language has shifted over into stuff like essence specifically, and properties no longer mean being proper to a thing, although I think it would make sense we went back to that. I really like when Hegel brings up such things. They show you the unity of language, in that even the way that our language is structured just naturally, contingently, has a logic that transfers in the concept across words that share the same root words, so to say. That makes language so nice. I don't know if you guys ever read stuff about ancient texts and how so many things connect together just by linguistic etymology. It's great, and it sucks that English is a mixed language which doesn't get to enjoy that kind of systematic unity of language. Continuing, Qualierung or Inqualierung, an expression of Jakob Böhme's profound but also profoundly turbid philosophy, signifies the movement within a quality, sourness, bitterness, fieriness, etc., inasmuch as in its negative nature, in its qual or torment, the quality posits itself, securing itself from another. It signifies in general the internal unrest of quality by which it produces and preserves itself only in conflict. There you go, Qualierung, Inqualierung. Qual has the negative literally in the language itself. Speculative language at its best. Spirit is writing something. Let me see what he says. We have to, so I'll read your comment once you post it, Spirit. Continuing on to something. In existence, its determinateness has been distinguished as quality. In this quality as something existing, the distinction exists. The distinction of reality and negation. Obviously, then, this, very important, the distinction exists. Let's reread this again. In existence, its determinateness has been distinguished as quality. In this quality as something existing, the distinction exists, the distinction of reality and negation. Now, though these distinctions are present in existence, they are just as much null and sublated. Reality itself contains negation. It is existence, not indeterminate or abstract being. Negation is, for its part, equally existence, not the supposed abstract nothing, but posited here as it is in itself, as existent, as belonging to existence. Thus quality is in general unseparated from existence, and the latter is only determinate qualitative being. Let's go back to our little drawing board. And hopefully I can show some interesting stuff that's going on here. So, okay. So he says, let me see. In existence, its determinateness has been distinguished as quality. In this quality as something existing, the distinction exists, the distinction of reality negation. So, here we have the distinction of reality and negation. Each is an existence, a totality of existence, which itself now is in the shape or form of existence. He then says, now though these distinctions are present in existence, they are just as much null and sublated. And the null and sublated means that, that insofar as the reality and negation are distinct, they are also unified as this total process of reality and negation. And therefore, they form yet again a unity. They are sublated as this totality. Reality itself contains negation. So, sorry about the yelling. So reality contains negation. How is that? Well, that is because, as you can see, reality has the distinction of being and nothing. So negation is in reality. We are redetermining prior concepts, just like how, if you remember, with being and nothing and becoming, one of the ways that you can think about how we get coming to be and ceasing to be is we do exactly that. We take becoming and we run being and nothing through becoming. So we take reality, we run reality, or rather run the internals of reality through quality itself. And quality is real and negated, and then we see these forms immanent to to the concept already. Negation for its part, of course, is said here that it is, reality has negation in it, and negation itself is real, because even in its distinction, this is a negative unity. A unity is an immediacy. The immediacy is being, existence. Therefore, we now have two existence. And this is basically what leads to something and other. And as you can see, one ways each for themselves now has existence reflected into them. So, we could have also just gone, instead of inward, we could also see this movement as working upward. It makes no difference. For those of you here, so does that one make sense? We'll go into more detail in the following paragraphs, but that's basically how we got to where we are with at this point. Okay, Spirit comments. On your comment about monopoles AW, what do you make of the moment of abstraction? For instance, when pure becoming becomes pure determinate being, this first immediacy is actually a return to indeterminacy. A repeat moment of pure being, and nothing then becomes concrete, only with itself immediate, which is when determinateness sees itself in the form of being as immediately identical with that pure being, which two determinate beings, with two determinate beings that are not distinct. It's the repeated movement of pure being and pure nothing, but pure quality. But before quality comes to be pure determinate being, is like a monopole until it's realized that it's not. Each new stage starts off as abstract and determinacy as determinate. Now with monopoles it doesn't work, because monopoles are already, it's an essential relationship. Essential relationships are codeterminate the moment they are posited. There is no moment in which you can mistake that for a moment I thought there was only essence, or for a moment I thought there was only appearance. To have an essence is to have an appearance. To have an appearance is to have an essence. So the very idea of polarity does not allow a moment of a mistaken abstraction of just one side. To do that is to regress from the concept of essence and back into the concept of mere being, or mere quality, and as the first book, The Doctrine of Quality. All right, so let's keep going with something. Continuing, this ablating of the distinction is more than the mere retraction and external reomission of it, or a simple return to the simple beginning, to existence as such. The distinction cannot be left out, for it is. Therefore, what de facto is at hand is this: existence in general, distinction in it, and the sublation of this distinction, the existence not void of distinctions as at the beginning, but as again self-equal through the sublation of the distinction, the simplicity of existence mediated through this sublation. The state of sublation of the distinction is existence's own determinateness. Existence is thus being in itself. It is existent something. I never see anybody ever mention this, but I consider this to be of monumental importance. God damn. Sorry, trying to highlight this. This is monumental importance because, as you can see here, he's already stated that immediately here we have being in itself with something. Whereas the development we're going to get after this is not that. The development we're going to get is, oh, first there's something, then there's the other, and then we have being in itself and then being for other. We can do that, but the fact that he mentions this here, and not only does he just mention it, this makes sense. I mean, just look at it. Existence is existent. It is existence within existence. It is in itself, literally. So if you wanted to, you could validly bring up this concept. Now, why won't he bring up this concept, even though it makes perfect sense to bring it up here? The reason I think he doesn't bring it up then immediately in the development is because we want to think about something before we think about being in itself. Mainly because it's in the way in which our linguistic notions and the way we relate these concepts, it is a case that being in itself is something that must be stated before after something. Something must be considered before we say it is in itself. So it has to, there is a logical progression there, but one could then make simple movements in which it could be justified to reverse the order if you just wanted to go against certain linguistic conventions.
But that doesn't explain. That's not an explanation. That's just, you're just repeating the problem. Why does something need to come before being in itself?
Well, the way it would be is that the way that's going to be defined. So whereas something is not explicitly defined with being itself, it's kind of co-determinate, but not really. Like the way it's going to be defined here is not through its being in itself, but rather against the other. Whereas being in itself is then going to be like a... it's going to be done over and against this otherness as well. So the way Hegel ends up doing it, yes, does make sense, and he does explain why it makes sense to make that difference, especially because we're going to do something other first, then we're going to say that the way something and other are against and through each other is through being in itself and being for other. But one could have also just done it in a different order if you wanted to like play out the logic just a little bit differently, but it would not make that much of a distinction. And so that's why I say it seems to me just kind of a linguistic convention, sort of. Just, what moment do we want to specify first, as opposed to, or it's not about what moment we want to specify first so much as what do we want to call it, what makes more sense in our language. Because either way, it's going to work the same. Being itself and being for other will have basically the same play out as something and other do. But also it just goes along better with our language to say something and other first, because then being for other has otherness in it, and being in itself has a certain reference in it which is not yet posited. So it's like how in the beginning of chapter 1 he says, we could talk about like being and non-being. And he's like, but I don't want to say non-being yet, just because it says too much. So even though these end up functioning very close to the same, if not exactly the same, really, it's just the very linguistics of it is kind of why we choose to use a certain term before the other. But I also bring that up as a point about how with the method, the way concepts are linked is through structure, through the forms that they have and the movements that they have. That if a concept has a structure that links to another concept that has that same structure, even if it is not normally would be considered immediately related, nonetheless they would share that structure. It'd be like, linking becoming with water or fluidity, in which the movement would be a movement of analogy, or rather conceptual analogy, which would just be that structure or dynamic of the concept. The same thing works here. The way he's choosing which concept comes next, what am I going to call it, all hinges on does this share the immediate link of the moment that we have, and what makes sense to use for a name for it. The movements will be the same, except then the terminology will just change. Yeah. And sometimes, depending on the terminology changes and what kind of things you're linking, it could be a very different movement. For example, the phenomenology is probably the one that I like to give the best example. The movements there are really hinging on analogies in some sections, rather than like some sort of immediate, obvious movement. What is the obvious movement between infinity and self-consciousness? It isn't, except through the concept of the form of the conceptual analogy. And if that's the case, then from infinity you could have chosen so many other different paths of so many other concepts that had the form of the infinite.
In what sense does a concept have the form of the infinite?
If you understand what the cognition of the concept is, you will see that the self-consciousness does have that form. Like it moves, its development generates the exact same self-referential relationship, which is also self-contained. So, infinity is a reflection or a being for self. Self-consciousness is for itself. Infinity is a self-containment of itself, reflection within itself. Self-consciousness is a self-containment of itself, reflected within itself. It's infinite in the sense that it needs no beyond to explain it. Self-consciousness also needs no beyond to explain it initially.
I'm just really curious about the analog. When we're talking about analogies, I'm not familiar with how Hegel's using. I understand what you mean about self-consciousness, but generally, when we start to work with analogies, they get confused with the analog.
Yeah. This is not like trying to think with like representational analogs. This is a very different concept of analogy. As far as I'm aware of, and it's been a while since I read the article where I learned this. This comes from, I'm using analogy in a Kantian sense, in which for Kant, analogy is the structure of the concept. Analogy is not like the Aristotelian of like, oh, it's like that, but it's not very clear what likeness is. With the Kantian analogy, the likeness is that concept, the structure of that concept. So